So in this previous video I looked into and tried to answer the question how many counterspells should you play inside this cEDH format. And the verdict that I reached from this video was somewhere around 12 counterspells. Or something around like 10 to 14, somewhere in the between. But this video right here is 8 months old and well, there's been updates to the format. Or you could say things like, or this is what people are saying, that we're in a mid-range hell, or everything is turbo now, everything is Rogsai now. So, yeah. Things develops over time. Has this number actually changed? But before we can get to that, we need to talk about what is actually a counterspell. So link in the description below of this video to this MOX field, not deck list, but card collection, you could say, of various things that I have calculated on or counted, or what I count as a counterspell. I currently have 163 different cards that are all counterspells, or well, are they? So we have Fork, Ionize, Dromar's Charm. So everything in the Magic the Gathering universe isn't a clear-cut counterspell, but functions like one. A good example of this is Izzet Charm, red-blue. Choose one, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2, so that's a counterspell. Then it can deal 2 damage to a creature, or you can draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. So it can do more than being a counterspell, but it still is a counterspell. Fork can function like a counterspell, or it's a card that can fight the control stacks, you could say, because you can copy a counterspell on the stack. Deflecting Swat is also usually utilized like a counterspell, because you can make a counterspell target Deflecting Squat and basically just negate the entire effect of that counterspell. But in my list I also have Silence, because, for example, someone casts Underworld Breach. Now you can respond with a counterspell, counterspelling the thing, or you can respond with Silence. And honestly, both will do the job. Silence will actually be a better interaction versus Underworld Breach specifically. So you could literally change this entire list name from counterspells to stack interaction if you want to. But here there's a potential you disagreeing with my list, so to say, and I can absolutely see that. I mean, you might consider other cards that should be considered a counterspell, so to say. But here's the cool part. Feel free to write whatever list you want me to look into individually for you in the comments below of this video. But please write them just like they would have been written in Magic. So if you're gonna want me to look into Cryptic Command, please write both C's here in capital, so I can just copy paste your entire list in the comments below, and I can run it with the sample size here to say, and I can give you the result. So if you think there's a better version of this list that I have, just write and tell me and I will look into it for you. But then what I do is that I go to this place, for example here we have Brian Koval on Rogsai, and I count the number of matching results basically. So we have a Daze, Flusterstorm, Force of Negation, Force of Will, Mental Misstep, Swan Song, Mindbreak Trap, Pact of Negation, Deflecting Swat, Flare Duplicate, Flare Duplication, Red Elemental Blast, Power Blast. And then I calculate the wins and losses and draws that deck achieved with that count of number of counterspells. And from that we got this heat map, and I need to become smaller. So over here we have a density. The more white you have, the less you have, and the more black you have, the more you have. So here we have the highest percentage. For example, each individual number here is how many decks have achieved that specific position. So for example here, we have 11 decks that have achieved a win rate, here win rate, just below 60 something, with 5 counterspells or 5 of those cards on my list in their deck list. And you can see here that the highest hit is around this portion right here, between 10 and 15 to the count. But that entire heat map is a little bit tricky to track, so here we have a scatter plot. So we have a counterspells to the count here, and win rate here. And the highest point, the blue dot, is just somewhere around 11 counterspells. Now the bars here, the wider they are, the more uncertain the result is. The blue dot could be anywhere around this area to this win rate basically. So this one, this bar right here, is a little bit more wider, so the answer is a little bit less secured. And what we can see here is that if you play a really low amount of counterspells, your win rate is quite poorly. But if you increase, it starts to go up, and once you hit somewhere around 11 or between 10 to 14, like in the previous video 8 months ago, you hit jackpot, the highest point, and if you start to increase a little bit more, the win rate starts to drop. It doesn't go down all the way here, so just playing lots of like here we're playing more than 20, the win rate definitely goes down, but it's not as much as playing very low amount. However, there's more to this story, and I would be doing some very bad statistics if I didn't just look into it a little bit more. You see, there could be individual answers for individual commanders. So now we're only looking at Rogsai, that currently sits on 1032 tournament entries and an average win rate of 26.44. So they are not the most popular, but they're quite popular and they are performing quite okay. And now we see a different outcome compared to what we saw when we look at all commanders. So here we have a equal win rate regardless of what the amount. So here you have something around like 5 counterspells, and here you have 12, and it doesn't matter if you're playing 5 or 12, your win rate is identical. However, if you're starting to play more, you're going down in win rate a tiny bit. So a natural next step is to look at something like Tymna Kraam that is very similar to Rogsai playstyle, but a little bit more mid-range, and you add one more color, and these are super popular. We currently have 3002 tournament entries, with an average win rate of 26.44, which was the same as Rogsai if I remember correctly. And this is how their outcome looks like. And if you can see here, we have something kind of similar. You see a very high win rate potential in a low count of counterspells, and it goes down if you're climbing up to 12, then it goes up again, and then it goes down again, which is a little bit of a mixed result. And there is a potential explanation for this, that you're seeing a very high win rate over here and a very high win rate over here. First of all, it just couldn't really matter. It could just be that both situations of counterspells will work equally good for you. But another potential explanation, a more logical one, is that my data sample is quite large. And it stretches back to the beginning of 2023, which means that it's older than 1 year. And the metagame could have changed throughout the course of time to my sample size. So what we could be looking at here is older meta here, newer meta here. Potentially. So then I did this, and now I want to highlight something, that this is not a perfect statistical look into. This is bad statistics, but it's a pilot study, you could say. It's just looking into something a little bit directly. So what we have here are the most newest tournament entries ever from the month of 07 to basically this month. So we're only looking at the most 2 recent month of tournament entries from only Tymna Kraam, Rogsai, Sisay, Nayela, and Tivit, and we have a sample size of 2190. And suddenly we see that the highest win rate point is at the lowest counterspell count from these commanders. And by the way, all of these have the potential to play a lot of counterspells. They're not identical, all of these, but they're kind of similar. And then the win rate starts to drop once you start to include more. But I want to highlight this picture right here is looking at all my entire data sample of basically from the start of 2003, all tournament entries from all commanders to this one. Now you can look here, the bars are very far apart, the bars here much closer, meaning that this is a more trustworthy result and this is just a potential of how it might look like. So this is not set in stone. The truth could be very different, but it's just a small indication of what we're seeing from that very low sample size over there. But what this is potentially showing for us is a potential meta shift, that it's starting to become better chance of an increased chance of winning by playing less counterspells or less cards that somehow interact with the stack. So the verdict from this video is that we're still, from the data that we have, seeing that a high amount of counterspells, somewhere around 9 to maybe 11, is a recommended value. But we have to be vigilant and we have to look into this again in the future and see if this is something that sticks around and if the total value actually starts to change as well. My big plan, or have always been, is that once we get to the end of this year, I'm going to remove everything from 2023 and only have the entire 2024 and then adding on to 2025. So 2024 and 2025 will be added together, similar to how this is 2023 and 2024. But once we remove the entirety of 2023, we're starting to see an update and a more better understanding of the current meta. Because I think that the meta shift that people are talking about happened like a few months ago, so to say. So even looking at the entire of 2024 might be incorrect as well. But I want to highlight that we don't have enough sample size to have a good understanding of what the actual value here should be. Because we need a lot of games to start seeing trustworthy result. So there will be updates to this, but a big takeaway right now is that there is a argument, or there is some indication from the data that reducing the amount of interaction and counterspells might be okay. It might not hurt your entire win rate that much. It might actually increase your win rate potentially. I hope you learned something from this or got inspired in any form of way. Regardless, thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.